All right, so today we're diving into something pretty relevant, I think, and maybe a little unnerving too. Cybersecurity and data privacy. And to kind of guide us through this whole thing, we're going to be looking at it through the lens of Edward Snowden, the former intelligence contractor.
Oh yeah, yeah. Snowden. He really, I guess you could say, blew the whistle on a lot of stuff a few years back.
Yeah. And his revelations, they're still making waves today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like he pulled back the curtain on this massive global system of data collection.
Yeah.
And it really raises these profound questions about like security and privacy and just the power dynamics in this digital age.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's almost ironic. It used to be we'd worry about locking our front doors, right?
Oh.
But now it's like we're carrying around these potential surveillance devices everywhere we go, like in our pockets.
Yeah, it's true.
And I don't know if you heard this, but Snowden himself, he actually physically takes apart every new phone he gets.
Really.
Yeah, and removes the microphones. It's like, that's not just being cautious, it's a statement.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. His actions, they're informed by his experience, right, at the NSA.
Mm-hmm.
He saw firsthand, like, all the intricate ways they collect data. And I think what's really concerning is that it's not just governments doing this anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Private companies, like the NSO Group, they're developing and selling spyware like Pegasus, which basically can turn, like, any smartphone into a total tracking device.
So wait, hold on. We're not just talking about someone listening to our phone calls.
No, it's way beyond that.
We're talking about, like, location tracking.
Oh, yeah.
Like intercepting messages and even accessing our cameras and microphones, like without us even knowing.
Potentially, yes.
That's a little creepy, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. And the implications, I mean, they go way beyond like just our own privacy.
Yeah.
Reports have linked Pegasus to the targeting of journalists and activists and even government officials.
Yeah.
So that raises questions about, freedom of the press, human rights, even political manipulation.
This is starting to sound like a spy movie or something.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
Snowden actually calls this the insecurity industry. And that just blows my mind, like that there's a whole industry making money off of finding security flaws in our devices and then selling them to people, like often without like any transparency or accountability. That's scary.
It is, yeah. It's like a digital arms race.
Yeah.
Like the goal isn't really to protect us, it's to exploit us.
Right.
And that brings up some real ethical questions like, where's the line between national security and individual privacy? How do we make sure these tools aren't misused? Big questions.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about. And it's kind of overwhelming, to be honest. It feels like we're trapped in a system we can't control. But, I mean, before we get to solutions, we should probably talk about, like, our own role in all of this.
Right.
Like, we use smartphones and apps and social media all the time, and that creates a ton of data. And, like, isn't that data what fuels this whole market in the first place?
Oh, 100%. That's a really important point. Our digital footprint is incredibly valuable. Like, every click, everything we buy online, it's all collected, analyzed, and then monetized on a massive scale. And it's fascinating, This data can be used to create these detailed profiles of us, like predicting our behavior and influencing our decisions and even potentially manipulating our emotions.
Wow, so we're basically fueling this whole industry without even realizing it. I mean, that's kind of disturbing. But I'm also wondering, like, is there anything good about this data collection? Like, surely there must be some benefits, right, to having access to all this information.
Well, yeah, of course there's some. I mean,
Yeah.
data can be used to improve things like healthcare and personalized education and enhance, like, transportation systems.
Yeah.
Even to combat crime. So the real issue is finding the right balance, like between those benefits and the risks to our privacy and our freedom. It's a tough equation.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. So we've established that this is super complex and the stakes are high. But, like, let's be real. What can we actually do about it? Like, as individuals, can we actually regain some control in this digital world where it feels like we're constantly being watched?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely something worth thinking about very carefully.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It seems like we're going up against these powerful forces, and it feels like we're kind of at their mercy.
Yeah, I understand how you feel. But you know what? David did beat Goliath. And in this digital age, knowledge is power. And I think awareness is the first step. Like understanding how our data is collected and used and potentially misused, that's crucial.
Okay, awareness. But what does that look like in the real world? Like, we can't just opt out of the digital world completely, right?
True. But we can definitely be more mindful of our digital footprint, right? Like you can start by carefully reviewing the permissions you grant to apps. Like, do they really need to know your location or have access to your contacts, your microphone? question every request.
It's so true. We just click accept without even thinking about it. Like, we're so used to being asked for our data that we don't even question it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what these companies are counting on. But you can break that cycle. Just take a moment to think about what you're sharing and why. You might be surprised how much you can limit data collection without really changing your online experience much at all.
So being more selective about like the apps we use and the information we share, that's a good place to start. What else can we do? Like, what are some other practical steps?
But wait, let's talk about passwords. Using a strong, unique password for each online account is like absolutely essential. It's so tempting to just use the same one for everything, but that's like super risky. I mean, one breach and your whole digital life could be compromised.
Yeah, it's like using the same key for your house and your car and your office.
Exactly.
Not a good idea. Okay, so strong passwords, check. What else?
Two-factor authentication. Whenever possible, turn it on. It's an extra layer of security. It means you have to enter a code from your phone or your email along with your password. So that makes it much harder for someone to like get into your accounts without your permission.
Yeah, I've seen that option, but I'll be honest, I don't always set it up. I guess it just seems like a little bit of a hassle, but you're making me realize it's probably worth it.
It really is. It's one of
Yeah.
the best things you can do for your security. And like most online services offer it now, so there's no excuse. And while we're on the topic of security, let's talk about keeping your software updated.
Oh yeah, the updates.
Those updates, they often include like really critical security patches. And those patches fix vulnerabilities that, hackers could use to get in.
Oh, so that's why those little update notifications are always popping up. It's like they're trying to tell us, hey, we're trying to protect you here.
Right. Think of it as your digital armor, always getting updated and reinforced to protect against the latest threats. And while we're talking about defenses, phishing scams. So these are basically attempts to trick you into giving away your information, like passwords or credit card numbers, often through emails or websites that look legit.
I've definitely seen those phishing emails, and they're getting more and more convincing. How can we avoid falling for those?
Yeah, so be wary of any emails or messages that you're not expecting, especially if they're asking for personal information. Always double-check the sender's address and look for any red flags, like misspellings or links that look a little off. And remember, legitimate companies, they'll never ask for sensitive information over email.
Okay, good advice. So we're talking about being more aware of our digital footprint, being careful about what we click on, and being proactive about things like software updates and security features. It's a bit of a mindset shift, but it doesn't sound impossible.
No, it's definitely doable. And remember, it's not just about you, it's about everyone.
Mm.
Like, the harder we make it for the insecurity industry to exploit us, the less incentive they'll have to do it.
I like that. It's like we're all in this together, right? Like we're all part of a collective defense against these digital threats. The more of us who take these steps, the stronger our defenses become. But I think it's also clear that individual action can only go so far. We need like systemic change to really address this problem.
Absolutely. And that's where collective action comes in. Supporting those organizations, fighting for digital rights, advocating for stronger privacy laws, holding tech companies accountable. It's all connected.
So we're talking about donating to those organizations, spreading the word about their work, even maybe contacting our elected officials, maybe even volunteering our time. Like those are all ways we can actually contribute to this fight.
Exactly. Don't underestimate your voice. Like, we can make a difference by demanding more transparency and accountability and just ethical practices from the companies and institutions that are collecting and controlling our data. Remember, the internet was built on openness and freedom, and it's up to us to make sure those values are still alive in the digital age.
It's kind of inspiring to think that we can maybe recapture some of that original spirit of the internet, even with all these challenges. But I'm also wondering about the psychological impact of all this surveillance. Like, even if our data is never actually misused, just knowing that it's being collected, it's unsettling, to say the least.
You're right, and that's something that doesn't get enough attention. Psychologists call it the chilling effect. Like, when we know we're being watched, we tend to censor ourselves.
Yeah.
We might not express certain opinions or click on certain links or even do certain things because we're worried about the consequences.
Yeah, it's like even if our data isn't actually misused, the fact that it could be misused, it still has this big impact on our behavior and even our sense of freedom.
Absolutely. And this chilling effect, it doesn't just impact individuals, it can impact society as a whole. It can stifle creativity and innovation and even open dialogue, which ultimately slows down progress and impacts everyone's well-being.
So it's not just about protecting our data. It's about protecting our freedom of thought, expression, and action in the digital age. But how do we actually do that? Like, how do we combat this chilling effect and feel like we have some control in a world that feels like it's always watching?
Well, the first step is to just admit how you feel, right? It's normal to be anxious or frustrated or even angry about losing our privacy. Like, those are valid feelings and we shouldn't ignore them. Talking about these issues, sharing your concerns with other people, and finding support, that can be really powerful.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like we're just supposed to accept this constant surveillance, like it's the new normal. But it's not normal, and it's not okay. We need to push back against that idea and reclaim our right to privacy, both individually and as a society. It feels like we're kind of at a crossroads, right? Like we have this incredible technology that connects us and informs us and like empowers us in so many ways, but at the same time we're facing these like unprecedented threats to our privacy, our freedom, and even like our sense of self in this digital world. So where do we go from here? How do we make sure that technology is serving us and not the other way around?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that we really need to pay attention to. Like, we can't just sit back and be passive observers in this whole digital revolution. We have to actively participate, shape the future of technology in a way that actually aligns with our values. It's crazy to think that the internet wasn't always like this. I mean, it was built on these ideals of openness and collaboration and freedom of information. But somewhere along the line, those principles got kind of lost in the shuffle, overshadowed by commercial interests and like this whole surveillance agenda. But I don't think it's too late to bring those original values back.
I like that. Reclaiming the internet, reasserting our digital rights, and kind of creating a future where technology actually empowers us instead of controlling us. It's a big challenge, but I'm starting to think it's actually possible. Where do we even start? It seems so overwhelming.
It is a huge task, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah.
It starts with small steps, little things that each of us can do that can create a ripple effect. Remember those practical steps we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Being mindful of our data, using strong passwords, supporting organizations that are fighting for our digital rights. Those are all things we can do right now to start making a difference.
Right. Taking back control little by little, not just protecting ourselves, but like inspiring others to do the same.
Yeah.
Creating a movement for change, a collective push for greater transparency, more accountability, and just more ethical practices from the companies that control so much of our data. But I'm also wondering, how do we deal with like the psychological impact of all this feeling of being constantly watched? How do we get over that and actually feel like we have some control?
Well, I think self-care is huge. Being aware of how this is affecting us mentally and emotionally, taking breaks from technology, disconnecting from the digital world, and reconnecting with ourselves. Spending time in nature, having real-life conversations, finding a balance and setting boundaries to protect our well-being in this like hyper-connected world. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many people who feel the same way. And by talking about it, sharing our stories and supporting each other, we can actually create a more powerful movement for change.
It really does feel like we're at this kind of turning point. We've got this incredible technology that like connects us in so many ways and gives us so much information. It can really empower us. But it also comes with these like huge risks to our privacy, our freedom, even like our sense of self.
Hmm.
So, I mean, where do we go from here? How do we make sure that technology is actually serving us, and not the other way around?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
And I think we really need to be asking it.
Yeah.
We can't afford to just sit back and watch this all happen. We've got to be involved. We need to shape the future of technology to make sure it reflects what we believe in. It's funny, when you think about it, the internet, it wasn't always like this. It was built on this idea of being open, collaborative, sharing information freely. But then somewhere along the way, those ideas got lost. Commercial interest took over and, this whole surveillance thing really ramped up. But, I don't think it's too late. We can still get back to those original values.
Yeah, I like that. Reclaiming the internet.
Yeah.
Taking back our digital rights and building a future where technology actually empowers us, not controls us. I mean, it's a huge task, but I'm starting to think maybe it is possible. But where do we even start? It feels so overwhelming.
Yeah, it is a big job.
Yeah.
But, it starts with small steps, things we can each do individually to create a ripple effect. Like, remember those practical things we talked about? Being mindful of what we share, using strong passwords, supporting those groups, fighting for digital rights. These are all things we can do right now, to make a difference.
Okay, yeah. It's about like taking control little by little, not just protecting ourselves, but encouraging others to do the same, building a movement for real change. pushing for transparency, accountability, more ethical practices from those companies that have all our data. But I'm also thinking about, the psychological impact of all this, like this feeling of constantly being watched. How do we deal with that? How do we, overcome that shilling effect and feel like we have some agency again?
Yeah. Well, I think taking care of ourselves is a big part of it. Being aware of how this is affecting us. Taking those breaks from technology, disconnecting from the digital world, and reconnecting with ourselves. Spending time in nature, having those face-to-face interactions, finding that balance, setting those boundaries to protect our well-being. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are a ton of people who feel the same way. And by talking about it, by sharing our stories, and by supporting each other, we can actually create a much stronger movement for change.
It's true. It can feel really isolating, facing these issues, but there's power in numbers. By working together, supporting each other, we can create a better digital future. A future where technology empowers us, helps us be more creative, and connects us in meaningful ways, instead of eroding our privacy and taking away our freedom. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. If we really believe that privacy is a fundamental human right, what are we willing to do to protect it? What choices will we make? What actions will we take? The future of the internet, and maybe even our society, depends on the answers we choose. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay empowered.